Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle Haas. And in this video, we're taking a look at Go Collect's hottest comics for the week of June 16th. Now, what is this list? Well, this list is the 5 hottest comic books that have had the biggest sudden increase in volume of sales over the last 2 weeks. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the 5 books and see what is moving. But before I get into the list, if you guys could drop me a like or a comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, helps support the channel, doing those things, I would appreciate it. But let us get into this article here today. And of course, this article is written by Matt Tuck. I will put a link in the description if you guys want to do your own reading, but I will give you guys my breakdown as well. And coming in here at the number 5 spot is a book that is actually a really cool one that has definitely been hot in prior weeks to this one. But this one right here is Amazing Spider-Man, number 4, up 28 spots, sitting in the 34th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, this of course would be the first appearance of the character known as Cindy Moon, aka Silk, who would be one of these Spider-Verse characters that came out in 2015, written by Dan Slott. Now, of all the plethora of Spider-Verse characters that has come onto the market, Silk has definitely been one of those characters that is slowly creeping up, increasing their popularity out there amongst comic book collectors. And this has been a book that has been speculated on for quite some time. There's been a lot of conversation that maybe Olivia Wilde was going to be directing a Silk movie in the Sony universe, or maybe Silk was going to be the next character showing up into the Spider-Verse number 2. Well, because of all those maybes, this book has definitely had its ups and downs in the market. But recently it came out by Lord and Miller, who of course are the producers of Into the Spider-Verse, and I think have been given the reins of the Spider universe as far as like the creative direction of it. They've recently announced that yes, the Silk series is in the works. It is going to be a live action series, and they're very, very excited about it, and they have a lot of good things to say, although it is still in development. And that obviously made ripples in the comic book market. A lot of people were thinking like, okay, the hope for the Silk show still remains, and this is definitely going to be a thing in the future, and it's definitely a cool book to own if you are a fan of Spider-Verse characters. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, we'll take a look here at what it's selling for. There is actually one 10.0 on the census, but that hasn't been sold since 2015. There's actually a few 9.9s, 11 to be exact. But let's take a look here at the 9.8s. There's 5,165 on the census. Fair market value suggested to be around the $325 range. 30-day moving is actually around the $350 range. So definitely a little bit of a spike up. And you can see here, this book has had many spikes in its history. Here we saw a spike in 2018. I think this is when the original rumors for this particular character showing up initially started. Then we had another big spike in 2020. Again, more rumors. Then we had another big spike in the market boom of 2021. It's had its little bit of a correction, and now it kind of sits at this new sort of floor price. It's been kind of trading sideways basically, but you know, at $325, being a modern character, when we think about other modern character books and where they sell around this price range, it's not necessarily a bad entry point if we're somebody who thinks that this character could have a huge future. And then of course down here at the bottom, 2014 book, not going to see it slabbed at the low grade, but typically speaking, when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, you can see them being sold around that $150 range or so. All right, let's go on now to the 4th hottest comic of the week. And the 4th hottest comic of the week is an interesting one because this is one that was actually trending not too long ago, and now it's actually making its way onto the hot list. But this one is one that we're all familiar with, right? Eternals number 1, up 29 spots, sitting in the 24th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this would be the first appearance of the character known as Icarus. It would also be the first appearance of the team known as the Eternals, a book that went absolutely bonkers last year in 2021 based off of the movie hype for the Eternals film, a book that came out in 1976, written and drawn by Jack Kirby. Now, what really can I say about this book that hasn't already been said? This was definitely a book that had a massive spike up last year, and probably one of the biggest falls as far as book values has gone in at least this last calendar year or so. And so definitely it's really interesting because now we see the book trading kind of at a level that is even lower than that of what it was selling for in years, you know, 2018, 2019, 2020, at least flirting with those sort of floor values, which is really interesting because, you know, if you're somebody who, let's say, was a fan of the Eternals, just in terms of like, you know, maybe you're a Jack Kirby fan, or maybe you've enjoyed them in the comic books, even outside of like movie, whatever you thought about the movie or whatever happened, it seems like the values for which this is selling for at the 9.8 grade should at least be as valuable as what they were selling for, you know, in prior years. And it's really funny how much of the movie's brand has really hurt the brand of this comic book right here. But, you know, we all know that, you know, the MCU MCU is still kind of going strong. We have these characters. They inferred that, the Celestials are going to be coming back at some point later in the MCU. So, it's pretty safe to assume that, we're definitely going to see Icarus again. And I think based on where the values of this book are right now, having hit this current floor, it definitely feels like a good opportunity to buy back into this book if you're someone who maybe, wants to spec on it once again, or maybe you are a fan of this character and you just want to own the Icarus book. This is definitely a good time to buy back into it, especially if you're someone who wants that 9.8 grade, because boy, oh boy, have these numbers really, really cooled off. But let's take a look at them right now together here. 9.8s have 616 on the census. Fair market value suggested to be around the $1,350 range. 30-day moving is actually $1,252. And one of the things that Matt points out in the article is that this is finally starting to see like a correction as far as the floor values of this book. We had a few sales here that you can see definitely in the 3-figure range, $995, $990, $938, even an $832 right here. But the actual last sale that we got was actually a $1,200 sale off of a heritage auction. So maybe this book is finally starting to turn that corner. Once it's like a mental thing. Once it gets back over 4 figures, it sort of begs the question like, okay, are we starting to see this thing rise back up again? But you can see here, just taking a look at that graph, definitely had a spike up due to the fact that, people were anticipating and excited about the Eternals film, had that correction, had that monstrous spike up when the trailer came out at the height of the market, had a huge falling off the cliff, and now we're sort of getting that little peak, a turning of the corner, so to speak, for this book right here. So it'll be interesting to see what this book eventually does, if we ever get, Eternals #2, or maybe if we ever see Icarus show up like in some other kind of space movie. Maybe he'll show up in like the Nova Project later on, next year or the year after that. And so it'll be interesting to see if, the characterization of Icarus can definitely turn the corner in the hearts and minds of comic book collectors. But when I go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, you can see them being sold all over the place depending on the grade, but typically speaking, you're looking to spend around that $80 to $100 range or so. All right, let's move on now to the third hottest comic of the week, and the third hottest comic of the week is a very cool one to talk about. This one is Tales of the Teen Titans number 44, up 30 spots, sitting in the 59th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, this of course would be the book that would feature the first appearance of Dick Grayson as Nightwing, a book that came out in 1984 by Marv Wolfman and George Perez. This book would also be the first appearance of Jericho and the origin of Deathstroke, but I think many collectors will like this book due to the fact that really it is the first appearance of Nightwing. And Nightwing is a really interesting character. In my opinion, one of the DC characters that is primed to really blow up into pop culture. I mean, when we take a look at the DC landscape, obviously we got your Batman collectors, you got your Superman collectors, you got your Green Lantern, you got your Hawkman, you got all these great characters like Wonder Woman, etc. But Dick Grayson Nightwing is really a character that has built sort of a strong following and strong foundation for himself in terms of comic book collectors. I mean, even the current runs with Nightwing are excellent reads. A lot of people love reading the Nightwing run. So it begs the question of like, if we ever get Nightwing onto the silver screen, what is the potential for a book like this, being kind of a copper age darling? And we all know that we have Nightwing currently in the Teen Titans show, but as Matt points out in the article, there's a lot of speculation that maybe Nightwing is going to have his movie debut at some point in the future, potentially in the Batgirl film or something like that. So there's a lot of excitement, around, the DC universe right now, the success of the Batman. It seems like DC is starting to turn the corner with some of their properties. So it's interesting to think about Nightwing's potential as being a character that could really blow up in the market. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, we'll take a look here. There's a couple 9.9s on the census, but let's focus on the 9.8s. There's 1,039 9.8s on the census. Fair market value has them around the $550 range, 30-day moving $589. So definitely a little bit of a spike up. And this is one of those books I think is really interesting to think about and look at in terms of its dollar amount, because yes, it did have a spike up in 2021 like every other comic book did based on those prices. But generally speaking, when you just kind of look at that graph, even though there's been some ups and downs, it's basically been able to maintain kind of a floor value in proportion to its spike up in 2021. And to me, that suggests that there's a lot of people that really believe in this character having some kind of cultural impact impact later on in the future, thinking that there might be a movie or a TV series about this character, and that this is a book that they should definitely hold on to. So it's really interesting to see that, and actually it's kind of nice to see that, unlike a lot of other books that have had that sort of 30 to 40% correction, this is one that is holding fairly strong overall in the market. Let's take a look at some of the other values just really quickly to see. Fair market value for the 9.6, $210, 30-day moving $232, 9.4 fair market value is $180, 30-day moving is $179, and being a 1984 book, of course, you're not going to see it slabbed at the low grade, but when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, generally speaking, they sell around that $75 to $120 range or so, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's go on now to the second hottest comic of the week, and the second hottest comic of the week is one I've talked about on the channel many times, but this one, of course, is Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars #3, up 44 spots, now sitting in the 38th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, this, of course, would be a book that came out in 1984, written by Jim Shooter. That would be the third issue of the crossover event known as Secret Wars. But most importantly, as far as why it's probably selling in terms of this week right here, is, of course, the first appearance of the character known as Titania. Titania, the villain character who is rivals of She-Hulk, who is going to be making an appearance in the She-Hulk show. Now, this is a really interesting book to look at and study in the market because of the fact that there's so many things going on with it in terms of its key distinctions, and also, based on where the landscape is with the MCU. Like, obviously, there's going to be people who are excited about the Titania character. There's going to be obviously people that have been specking on, Titania, and maybe they're going to want to, flip their books during the course of the FOMO hype during She-Hulk. But then you also have this fact that we're building up to Secret Wars, and being that this is a Secret Wars book, we all know that the Secret Wars books and titles are also going to get hot once we get, some kind of Avengers Secret War payoff later on. And, based on when I think about the character of Titania, the She-Hulk doesn't have a huge rogue gallery of villains, but when I think of Titania, I definitely think of her as a character that has had kind of a decently long history in terms of, being a villain amongst all of our Marvel superheroes. And I can definitely see Titania surviving after the She-Hulk show and having a factor later on in, the MCU universe. So I really do think that this is an interesting book to hold on. I mean, outside of all this MCU speculation, Secret Wars is everybody's favorite crossover event. So I still think that this is a really great, significant book to get your hands on. And, it's definitely one that has had, big ups and big downs in terms of its values in the market. But, based on its new floor price, I think is one of the reasons why a lot of people are starting to buy back into this thing. But as we take a look at some of the values here, we'll see 9.8s have 744 on the census. Fair market value suggests it to be around the $210 range. 30-day moving is $230. Definitely a book that has had a pretty sizable correction in 2021, and now is starting to slowly trend downward, but finding its new floor value. And kind of when I look at that graph, I think of it as like this has been kind of a slow and steady creep up in the lead up to the She-Hulk show. And it definitely feels like now, whether you're a fan of the character or, you're trying to flip the book, either way, this feels like not a bad entry point to buy into this thing if you actually really want it at that 9.8 grade level. 9.6 is fair market value around the $95 range. 30-day moving trading right in line to that, basically around that $100 price point. And when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you can find them being sold around that $25 to $30 level or so. All right, let's move on now to the hottest comic of the week. And the hottest comic of the week is one that is interesting to talk about. This one right here is all new, Marvel Now .1, #1, up 56 spots, now sitting in the 30th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this would be the first appearance of Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel. A really interesting book to talk about due to the fact that we now, right now on Disney Plus, have the Ms. Marvel show. And for the most part, it seems like the reviews have been, middle of the road. Some people kind of like it. Some people realize that it's for a younger audience. I think that that is also reflective of this book's values overall, because, this is one of those books that I thought was really interesting where, usually when you get that first trailer for whatever property there, you see a big flurry of sales out there in the market. And I actually made a video where I was talking about this book when we got that Ms. Marvel trailer, and we really did not see a flurry of sales for this thing due to the fact that I think that this is one of those books that, just appeals a little more to the younger demographic. Obviously, the younger demographic doesn't have the money to be spending, on, 9.8 values for this thing. But as Matt points out in the article, this is definitely a book that has not been seeing all new record highs. But, as we can see it right here, it is the #1 book this week. And I think that is due to the fact that, people are watching the show. It's still a book that is really, really, flatlined as far as its values are concerned. And, maybe maybe you're someone out there who's like, hey, why not? Let me just pick this up. Maybe in a couple years time, Ms. Marvel will be a bigger character. Certainly, I think when she shows up in the Marvels movie later on next year, that might be a little more attractive for the older demographic. Definitely seems like the actress is having fun with the character and doing a pretty good job with it overall. So we will see what happens with this book later on in the future. 9.8s have 356 on the census. Fair market value suggested to be 850. 30-day moving is 881. And as we take a look here, that's still a far cry from where it once was. You can see right there, just looking at that graph, this is definitely a book that has had a pretty big, spike up and a pretty big fall off. 9.6s have fair market value around the $240 range. 30-day moving at 251. 9.4, 160. 30-day moving 168. And of course, down at the bottom, not going to see it slabbed at the low grade. But when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you can see them being sold around that $120 to $150 price point or so. Anyways, that is all for this video. Those were Go Collect's hottest comics for the week. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys have any of these books? Have you guys been enjoying Ms. Marvel? Are you guys looking forward to She-Hulk? Let me know in the comments. Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and we'll see you in the next video.